Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Yasamin Rasulzadeh. I'll be opening up our workshop today, and then we'll be handing off to the project team to carry you all through a productive discussion. So again, thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Transportation Working Group. I do want to quickly note that this meeting is being recorded today. So before we get into welcoming remarks, next slide, please, Elise. I do want to say that we will be providing some language translation for today's meeting. So please take a moment to find the interpretation tool on the Zoom menu bar. It looks like a globe. And everyone will need to choose the language you prefer to use to listen to in this meeting. So you must select a language, even if it is English. Let's take a moment to have everyone select their language now. And I'd like to also introduce you to our interpreter, Giovanna. She's going to be explaining our Spanish and English language features that we have available for the workshop today. So if you could please come off mute, Giovanna, and tell us everybody about these features.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Giovanna Wormsbecker, and I'll be your Spanish interpreter during this meeting. In order to provide language access, this meeting will have simultaneous interpretation from English to Spanish. Please note that the translation globe will not appear until after I've read through all language instructions. Therefore, we're asking that everyone joining us for this event, please select your preferred language to facilitate hearing presenters and participants clearly. If you're on a laptop or a desktop, you will see a globe at the bottom right of your screen. Please click on the globe icon that says interpretation and then select English. If you're on an iPad or a similar device, locate the three-dot menu on the upper right and select language interpretation and then select English. When it is your turn to speak, please remember to be loud and clear and speak at a moderate pace, as the interpreter will be interpreting simultaneously into the other language. Buenas tardes a todos. Me llamo Giovanna Wormsbecker y voy a ser su intérprete en español durante esta reunión. Esta reunión contará con interpretación simultánea bidireccional del inglés al español. El globo de traducción no va a aparecer hasta que se hayan leído todas las instrucciones en los dos idiomas. Por lo tanto, pedimos que todos los presentes seleccionen su idioma preferido para facilitar escuchar a los presentadores y los participantes con claridad. Si está utilizando una computadora, verá un icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla a la derecha en forma de globo que dice Interpretación. Haga clic ahí y seleccione Español. Si está utilizando un iPad o un teléfono, localice el menú de 3 puntos que aparece arriba a la derecha, haga clic en Interpretación de idiomas y elija Español. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, por favor recuerde hablar con voz fuerte y clara y a un paso moderado, ya que el intérprete estará interpretando simultáneamente el otro idioma. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So if we can have the translation team initiate the language channels here, and then we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so we will be using also a variety of methods for you here today. You'll be seeing the same features whether you are joining from your computer or your cell phone. So please type in your thoughts using this chat feature. This is located at the bottom of your screen. And if you're joining by cell, select the 3 dots to the lower right of your screen. If you would like to speak over the audio, please use the raise your hand option, also located at the bottom of your screen. And if you're calling in, please enter *9. We'll be using these 2 features in addition to a virtual whiteboard. Additionally, we will pause in between our speakers to ask you questions and hear your thoughts. And the majority of our time will be focused on hearing your comments and answering your questions as best that we can. So here are those same Zoom features, but from a mobile view for anyone who may be joining from their mobile device through the Zoom app. If you select More on the bottom taskbar in the Zoom, you will see options to chat and select your language of choice and raise your hand to indicate that you would also like to speak. So again, my name is Yasamin. I'm part of the project team that the County of San Diego Land Use and Environment Group has formed to help move forward in developing the regional decarbonization framework. Today, you will hear from Mortaza Baksamusa, our program manager for regional sustainability from the Land Use and Environment Group Executive Office, and Scott Anders, who is the director of the Energy Policy Initiative Center at the University of San Diego. I'd like to take a minute to just set the stage for how these working groups will be structured, where we are today with the framework, and how you will continue to shape the implementation playbook. So we have set up 5 special topic working groups to focus on key emitting sectors and solutions for addressing our changing climate. These will be the categories that will help guide the development of the implementation playbook with a draft ready by the end of the year. Today, as we are working through the transportation sector, we would like to hear specific actions that can be included in the implementation playbook, such as specific plans, policies, or activities. Mortaza will give you more context and what we are really looking for in a bit. So while we were working through the special topic working groups, we will be utilizing our engagement portal to facilitate these groups. Everyone should have received instructions on registering to the portal. And if you haven't yet, please do so by going to the engagement portal link that's also just sent in the chat right now. This engagement portal will be the central area where all workshop materials, documents, and notes will be uploaded. You can also see our meeting agendas there, as well as have the space to share ideas and ask questions. The RDF team will be monitoring this site and updating it within 48 hours of each meeting. Please also do note you only have access to the workshop groups that you have previously shown interest in from the interest form that was sent to you before. But if you do not have access and if you would like to be a part of a special topic working group, please feel free just to email us at the zerocarbon@sdcounty.ca.gov email you see here. So for today's agenda, Mortaza will be giving you a quick recap of what the implementation playbook is and how you will help shape it. Then Scott will give you some additional context on regional emissions. Then we will dive right into the 3 topics we're going to be discussing today. It'll be reduce miles driven, reduce fuel use, and clean fuels. Here's where we would really like to open up the bulk of discussion, hearing from you and your ideas. We also have Rebecca from our RDF team who will be sharing her screen as we have open discussions, and we'll be taking live notes. So please remember to speak clearly and slowly so that we make sure Rebecca can capture all of our ideas. And as we reach the end, we will be opening up the discussion for any topics that we may have not discussed, and then we will close. So just one last quick reminder to put your name and organization in the chat. And now I will turn the presentation over to Mortaza to give us a background on the regional decarbonization framework.
Hello, everyone. Just take a couple of minutes to give a recap of the framework. My name is Mortaza Baksamusa, the program manager for the regional sustainability. And I'm here to talk about the integrated regional decarbonization framework. So we're taking an integrated approach to the framework, as you heard from Yasamin, from study to action. First, the technical report by UC San Diego and the University of San Diego. This is the first study of its kind that scientifically established the strategies to eliminate regional emissions of heat-trapping gases. The study analyzed over half of the emissions across the region in 2035 and beyond would still remain unaddressed, even if every government implemented their respective climate action plans. Second, a workforce development study by Inclusive Economics to ensure that we have high-quality green jobs. It explored the ways in which actions to lower pollution from the region's industries can do so in ways that support workers. Beyond this, the technical report and the workforce development study are complete, and we're now proceeding to implementation stage. This implementation playbook, which we are now beginning, was previously referred to as the Implementation Pathways Report. We will provide more details in the coming slide. So this is our organizing framework for individual and collective actions for getting to zero carbon emissions. We are starting with best practices by learning from measures that other governments have already adopted, so in climate action plans and other sustainability plans. However, this is a playbook, not a plan. It does not have enforceable mandates and milestones. Rather, it will be a list of options with plug-and-play strategies organized by 5 topics we discussed so that we can share our collective knowledge. And it will be an accessible resource for all players in the public and private sectors to design, finance, and implement decarbonization projects, plans, and policies. With the support of University of San Diego's Energy Policy Initiative Center, this implementation playbook will be presented to our Board of Supervisors in spring of next year and will provide guidance at 3 levels. First, we will draw out actions that each organization, business, and government can do on their own. Second, building up on these actions, we will explore community-wide what we can do in terms of local, state, and tribal governments. And third, emissions know no boundaries. So we will identify these from a regional perspective, where we can get efficiencies and greater outcomes for greater collective impact. Today, we are in the working group for transportation. We're looking for ideas on actionable policies, programs, projects for the implementation playbook. Through all these topics, there are three common themes that we want your feedback on. And think of it from an organizational operations, from businesses, local governments, what we can do at a regional level, as well as at an individual level. First, what works and does not work based on your experience. Second, what are the impacts on underserved communities, positive or negative? Third, what are we missing? The types of activities that could be out there include data collection and analysis, including research and development, implementation plans, financial incentives, workforce training, education and outreach, as well as activities to implement actions, as well as monitor the results. These questions are here to help us guide the conversation as we are looking for actions that we can include in the implementation playbook. We need your ideas on what is already out there. With this, I'll turn it over to Scott to begin the discussion on the topics that we want your feedback on today. Thank you very much for it.
Thank you, Martaza, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm going to provide some high-level context for our discussion about the three aspects of transportation that we're going to be discussing today. So first, just to kind of back up and look at regional emissions, these are the top three emitting categories or sectors. And you see that on-road transportation, basically cars and trucks, represents almost half of regional emissions, followed by electricity and natural gas. So combined, these three sectors represent about 80% of all emissions. And then the remaining emissions are made up from a number of categories, including industrial gases, other fuels like wood and propane, off-road transportation, which includes construction vehicles, solid waste, and numerous other smaller categories which represent 1% or less. Next slide. So to frame our discussion, maybe to break it up a little bit, and this is how we think about transportation, kind of what are the ways we can reduce emissions. We can reduce the miles driven, so walk, bike, transit, telecommuting, carpooling, basically some alternative to driving in a car or truck. The second is reducing fuel use, and this can be done through the efficiency of vehicles or the transportation system efficiency. So roundabouts, traffic signals, we'll talk more about that. And then finally, clean fuels like electric vehicles or vehicles fueled by other cleaner fuels like hydrogen. So I'm first going to talk here about reducing miles driven, and then we'll get into our discussion, and then we'll go sequentially through those other topics. So we're going to just provide some high-level background on these topics, and this slide shows some of the major state regulation and laws that affect this idea of vehicle miles traveled or miles driven. So SB 743 requires vehicle miles traveled and emission measurements and mitigation for new development. And this is a change from the way that we used to do it, which was more of a traffic-based approach based on level of service. There's a requirement for any update to a circulation element to include a complete streets plan. And in terms of regional action, there was a bill passed several years ago called SB 745, and that requires SANDAG to create a sustainable community strategy to achieve greenhouse gas reduction targets, mainly through transportation strategies. So just a couple high-level key considerations to think about as a backdrop to the conversation. Transportation, like some other things we're going to talk about in these working groups, is inherently regional. The roads or the bus lines or the trolley rails don't stop at the border of the city. It's an integrated regional system. And the amount of miles driven is heavily influenced by land use patterns. So generally speaking, higher ridership can be attainable in more heavily or more densely populated areas, urban areas, as opposed to kind of backcountry rural areas. And in our region, we kind of have both of those things to think about. There's also potentially a trade-off between reducing miles driven and low carbon fuels. There is an argument, right or wrong, but just to throw it out there, that we don't have to reduce miles driven. We just have to reduce the emissions associated with each mile. If we can get to zero, it doesn't matter how many miles we drive. Obviously, that doesn't address congestion and other kinds of issues around access to mobility, but just wanted to throw that out as a trade-off. And then, of course, there are equity implications around mobility options, in particular, the transportation cost burden, which is something that we discussed in the technical report that was referenced earlier. So just some examples of the kinds of things that we might see in the playbook, and we're looking for your input on, and examples, specific kind of action-oriented examples like this in our discussion today. So Murtaza kind of laid out these three buckets of scale, if you will. And so at the organization scale, we've seen in our region organizations and governments in terms of their municipal operations adopting remote work policies for employees. Some employers provide incentives for their employees to take alternative modes of transportation. At the community scale, we've seen local jurisdictions develop and implement active transportation plans. And some of the things they've done are things like expanding the bikeway network. At the regional level, we could conduct a regional transportation equity analysis, and there are numerous opportunities to affect this issue of miles driven, and one of those is increasing the transit service frequency in urban dense areas. So with that, I'll turn it back to Murtaza for the discussion.
Thank you, Scott, for that overview of reducing miles driven, for which we want your input. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all the other agencies, public agencies that are in this room today, virtual room, cities of San Diego, Solana Beach, our Air Pollution Control District, California Air Resources Board, and the US Navy. There might be others that have left out. Please let me know. And with that, I want to, as Rebecca puts up the mural, I wanted to go back to the question, and that is, what are the actions that governments, businesses, individuals can do to reduce driving, particularly to and from work? We will be using this mural tool to receive your ideas by topic. It will also help us prepare this implementation playbook and to follow up with you. And in order to facilitate this discussion, I will also have Yasamin with me on this. You can use the chat feature to have your comments, as well as if you want to come over audio, if you can raise your hand, it'll help me in calling you by turn. And with that, I'll just wait a minute for you to get your thoughts together on the topic being how do we reduce miles driven, especially to and from work. Okay, go ahead, Craig. It seems like you have some thoughts.
Yes, sir, Murtaza, I appreciate it. Am I coming through?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes,
good, very good. I appreciate this opportunity. Your presentation's already mentioned that to reduce miles driven, there's a direct function between amount of miles driven and land use pattern. Now, one thing that you haven't talked about so far, which I think is critical, and it's a central county responsibility, it doesn't depend on other jurisdictions to control, is to control the county allowed, planned, and zoned land use pattern. I think one of the worst things that we could do right now would be to increase the number of vehicle miles driven by encouraging and allowing continued land use sprawl into the county's back country. You mentioned that there's a possible trade-off of just going all the way over to electric vehicles. Well, electric vehicles depend on sources to produce that electricity, some of which can produce carbon. But more importantly, the switch over to electric vehicles is going to take decades, decades and decades. So it's incumbent upon us right now to reduce vehicle miles traveled and to not increase the number of vehicle miles traveled by encouraging or allowing land use sprawl. And I want to note that it's interesting. I love this initiative, the regional decarbonization framework and strategy. Often with an organization as big as the county, you've got a left hand knowing what the right hand is doing issue. And tomorrow, the Board of Supervisors is going to receive a hearing and a proposal to adopt a vehicle transportation guide to implement VMT rules that would not just allow, but encourage a land use sprawl in the backcountry. So I think this is something extremely important for the county to control. Don't increase the vehicle miles traveled by having a sprawl land use pattern.
Thank you, Craig. And I'll just kind of summarize that point that Craig mentioned, that tomorrow there is a consideration by the board on the transportation study guide. The question about land use intersection between land use and transportation is a critical one in regional decarbonization. And we'll have that discussion today as well as in the land use workshop working group. So let's do that in both the sections. This is an important point. I see a lot of comments coming in on the chat, and I'll try to. I know there's a lot here. Thoughts that you have, Remga, here. So I would welcome you to come on the audio so I can express them correctly.
Oh, but, sure. Sorry, I will.
Yeah, just.
I didn't mean to dump all that.
Just
but
a second, Remga, I'll calling you in a minute. But I'll just go over other comments. John has several comments here. John, I would encourage you to also come if you can and emphasize the ones that you feel you want to cover yourself, but I can try to cover some of them myself. John mentioned free or very low cost mass transit would greatly encourage ridership, and to work with businesses for EV shuttle, trolley, for last mile trip. Last mile trip is a pretty significant issue, especially because of the topography and connecting transit to where people work and live. It's important to have business participation here. We encourage anybody that has ideas on how we solve this. It will be very helpful. Then also John mentioned the EV shuttles from parking transit areas to and from beach and shopping entertainment areas, and developing bus rapid transit. Jose mentions a couple of points here about taxing parking, encouraging electric bikes for last to and from public transit. Okay, I have Victoria, and then I'll go to Remga, and then I'll come to Kyle. All right, go ahead, Victoria, if you can come on the audio.
Thank you, Maritza, for this, and thank you, Yasmin, for chairing this meeting. I think we need to have public transportation as safe and accessible as possible, especially for low-income, underserved environmental justice communities. And I think that starts with each bus stop having the bus routes listed, having shade structure, lighting, and like seats available at each bus stops. I think that looks like having bike lanes and sidewalks and ADA crosswalks and trolley systems, especially in these areas, possibly having more bus stops in lower income areas, and what someone mentioned earlier, having it more affordable. So kind of how there's the Pronto cards, maybe expanding that so more folks could have access to free public transportation.
Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. Those are very key points. I know Kyle probably also has some about the stories for transit, but just give me a second, Kyle. I'll come to you next after if Remga is still waiting.
No, I did really put all the thoughts there just in case, because I do have to leave soon, but the main idea is also looking at the part of the equation where why do we keep thinking we have to drive everywhere like we always used to, or at the same time. We really have a lot of technology now to do otherwise, and I think the private sector is really adopting work from home policies. So I think as government agencies, we take up a lot of real estate around. We should be the first to lead in that. I know that's a tough transition, but I think, again, that actually reduced vehicle miles traveled during the pandemic when it was an emergency and we had to, but we would all agree, I think, that the climate is an emergency. But it's hard to force everyone, but just much more accepted flexibility around this, I think, would help the environment a lot. Including conferences. I just saw everyone go back to all these conferences in person, which is flight trips and everything, and just really considering the benefits of in-person. Of course, it is important sometimes, but maybe that's just the exception versus the rule. And then also with thinking of equity issues, and I agree, public transportation, but at the same time, that feels like a more long-term situation, and it seems like, I don't know how to say this. I guess this is the most honest way to say it, is that it's like, okay, the people with more money get the electric cars. They get to go everywhere where they want on their own schedule. But you people who have less money, wait for the bus, take a long time. Like, I think that the amount of money it might cost to increase some of that transportation infrastructure, maybe it could also be used to, again, purchase electric vehicles for lower income people. Just which sounds expensive, but if you think about how we're spending all our other money, it might not be. So I think just giving lower income families, moms that are busy with lots of kids, just give them the car, so then they have ways to get around. That's just another idea. So
and Remga, you mean like an electric vehicle?
Yeah.
Or yeah. Okay.
Like a procurement, like as a region with the JPA or whatever, have like a procurement thing. And I know that sounds very ambitious, but again, when we have all these rebates we offer, it costs so much money to administer these grants and rebates and the time and energy we spend. I guess I just have a general philosophy of shortening the distance between the funding source and the person who benefits, like a few loop-de-loops, especially if we know the end result we want is for people to drive electric vehicles. So let's just kind of get there as quick as possible.
If you don't mind, Remga, I'll put this topic in the next, this particular about EV fleet into
right, because we're still on miles driven.
Yeah. So Rebecca,
Sorry.
if you can just move that over. But that's okay. We took your, really appreciate it. And also, let me go back to the point you were raising about telecommuting. It can actually affect all three levels, at an individual or business level, at a municipal level or governmental level, as well as at a regional level. If we can facilitate and help that conversation on how do we telecommute more, it's, you know, as people are kind of like, it's becoming a fad, if you will, in terms of returning to the office and meeting people. And then the question is, where is the trade-off in terms of what is our carbon footprint in returning to that normal life, and especially high air travel, back to pollution and congestion on freeways, and what is the cost of that? Okay, as I'll move over to, I'll go next to Kyle, who's been waiting patiently. I appreciate you. Thank you. your time.
Hi, everyone. Kyle with Environmental Health Coalition. I wanted to uplift one of the campaigns that Environmental Health Coalition has worked in partnership with other community-based organizations, the 10 Transit Lifelines, which takes the stories and lived experience of environmental justice community leaders on how to prioritize both in the short term and long term improvements to the mass transit system for things like restrooms, express buses, increased frequency, a Blue Line Express. And there's a lot of great content there. So if you haven't seen the videos, they're about 1 minute each. Take a look. Highly recommend that. And I wanted to mention that the challenge of reducing vehicle miles traveled really comes down to the ease of access for alternatives. And at the local/regional level, the government agencies such as the county or the cities have control over the siting and permits required to improve transit stops, like adding restrooms or shade trees or a structure. So at the local level, that's really key. If there's more funding at the state or federal level for mass transit infrastructure, or even regional initiatives, cities are really at the forefront of getting the improvements to the facilities. A couple of other things that were mentioned, I wanted to add another tally point for is subsidies for transit for large residential buildings so that residents can get reduced transit fares, more funding for things like the Pronto card, e-bike subsidies to handle the last mile, first mile problem. And then I just wanted to mention that I've seen, and I'm not able to definitively say that this is true, but I have heard studies done on the post-pandemic work driving patterns where there was an extreme drop-off in vehicle miles traveled in the aftermath of COVID-19, but those have steadily risen even as people are not returning to the office, because a lot of the trips that we would not have been able to take while we're at the office, like going to the grocery store during the lunch break or zooming around to do errands, is actually displacing the gains that we saw from that initial VMT reduction. So just throwing that out there, that remote work presents its own challenges and displacement of the VMT. And the last point I wanted to make is that the trade-off from a combustion vehicle to an electric vehicle, zero emission vehicles is actually a misnomer, because electric vehicles have a lot of emissions. Sorry, are you asking me to wrap up, Murtaza?
I was indicating it has a lot of moving parts. It causes the particulate matter. So it's wrong to kind of think that vehicles are zero pollution, when pollution is more than just the emissions from the gas. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So there's data that shows that an electric car for a single occupancy vehicle has as much as half of the lifetime emissions of a combustion vehicle. So if we replaced every car in San Diego County from combustion to electric, it would only reduce half of the transportation emissions, because there's energy required to produce the vehicles, dispose of them, mine the resources. So really the true solution is to get people out of cars. And for environmental justice communities, they can't afford to buy a car now. they're not going to be able to afford to buy an electric vehicle. We really have to make transit work for environmental justice communities first, but then really make it work for a broad region. I know that's a regional problem, but we can't rely only on the transition from combustion vehicles to electric vehicles. We really have to invest in transit to get people other options. And so the affordability for low-income communities who can't afford to buy a car now and just will never really be able to afford to buy a car. That's why it's so critical to invest in transit. So thank you.
Thank you, Kyle, for that in terms of investing in transit. And we're going to come back to the issue about the clean fuel as well in the next topic. I want to kind of just do a time check on myself, and I know, and you're in queue, so I'll just stop with you. But before I come to you, there's a few comments I wanted to. There are different viewpoints, and that we need to look at in terms of what is the benefit of transit, particularly in terms of. First, I want to mention Rebecca Falk comments in terms of she's in Borrego Springs. She lives in a backcountry village. The traffic speeds within their 5-mile valley and encourage electric golf carts that are on the road legal. They probably would benefit from roundabouts. I think we're going to get to roundabouts also in a future topic. And they would like to see some electric service in the periphery to downtown and back, so that they can make local trips, etc. William Wellhouse also lives in the backcountry and mentions that when someone like William makes a trip to the city, there should be a convenient transit hub on the outskirts where one can park, feel secure, and find easy transit into the city. Or conversely, some way should be found to create a congestion tax for actually driving into the city instead of taking transit. There are a few comments here about, John says he wants to stop sprawl. Jose says that public transit should be free. And John also mentions Sandex 5 big moves. And I'm going to you, but I think you already started on the chat. We say, talk about mobility hubs. Oh, wait, go ahead. Come on, audio.
Yeah, thank you. I'll keep this brief. This will be officially my last week of speaking as a private citizen before I start working for the county in a climate-related capacity. So, as a climate consultant, I just wanted to say I know that it's part of the RDF, and it's in the chat comment related to mass transit. Just a reminder, I'm basically I'm new here to San Diego. I've only been here for a couple of years. I've come from Washington, D.C. I've been incredibly fortunate to have lived in Europe and in Japan. So just outsider perspective for a second on reducing miles driven and carbon emissions. It is what has happened in Asia and in Europe. And I'm sure all you guys are well aware of what's happening with, the train systems over there, sort of in quotations, and how even those networks are being decarbonized, and how radically things have changed in the last 3 decades in mass transit overseas. So just a reminder, San Diego is the second largest city in the United States. Second largest in California, 8th largest in the US. I would love to see, I'd love to know if anyone can speak to us at some point in panel or otherwise. Scott, I'd love to chat with you about this, just obstacles here to mass transit. I know I can imagine land use issues I'll be diving into very deeply in my new job. But, just looking at the coaster, for instance, is so slow. And of course, we've got the eroding cliffs. And I know there are plans to move things inland, and I'm well aware of sea level rise issues here. But I just think there are a lot of missed opportunities. We're going to spend a lot of money. For instance, I'm coming from Washington, D.C. What's happened in D.C. and the ring design for Metro, you'd be amazed how many people of all walks of life use Washington, D.C.'s Metro system. So just my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Anne. Just before I end this topic, I want to acknowledge some of the points that Kyle had made, which we're not able to give enough coverage, but we do in this workshop, but we do have that in mind for the playbook itself, which is carbon content, both in terms of the production of the vehicle itself, as well as the fuel and the life cycle emissions. Those are critical questions. That's where the discussion is going in the future. Also, I think a couple of people have mentioned that this is not just about the vehicle itself, it's also about the infrastructure that supports it. So impacting environmental justice community. And Victoria mentioned, for example, things that cities can do, such as in urban design, to make certain transportation options more amenable, secure, and safe to use, particularly like things like bus stations. And with that, those were, I know there's more chat coming in. I think I need to transition to the next topic, so we'll come back to you. In the meantime, Rebecca, thank you so much for putting up the mural. I'll turn this discussion back to the next topic on reducing fuel use to Scott.
Thanks again, Mortaza. Great discussion. Thank you so much for all that input. And we're going to move on to the next one here. And I think what we're seeing, and we know this, but this is all connected, lots of overlaps, lots of interconnections. But for purposes of kind of really focusing in on these topics, we wanted to split them up. And but again, recognizing that there's lots of overlap here. So, excuse me. This second category, maybe it's probably the least clear, I think, of the three. And so we're going to just provide some background here. But really what we're talking about here is, you know, if you have to drive a combustion vehicle, make it efficient, and also make the overall system efficient so that all vehicles use less energy, whether it's electric or otherwise. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about reduced fuel use. And the kind of the most obvious example of this are the federal standards for fuel economy called corporate average fuel economy. Some people know them as CAFE standards. People who buy new cars will see the stickers on the windows about miles per gallon. So just an example of the kind of rule or law that we're talking about, at least at the federal level here. There's lots of other ones happening in California. We're going to talk about those in a second. Next slide. So some key considerations here. I already mentioned this. I previewed it, but we're really talking about vehicle efficiency and transportation system efficiency. And so, how efficient is our regional system, not just individual cities or neighborhoods. We want to look at this as a kind of a holistic, although each, as Mortaza said, a lot of these things nest from individual to organization to community to region. And regional coordination is really important here because we see that a lot of climate action plans have measures around traffic signal synchronization or roundabouts, but don't always work with, this jurisdiction that's one city over. Maybe they have different traffic signal timing or synchronization consultants or software, and maybe there's no way to even make them work together. But these are the kinds of things that we're interested in hearing more about. How do we improve kind of system efficiency? So a couple examples on the organization side. Over time we've seen organizations like cities or businesses purchasing fuel efficient vehicles. Now, of course, we're seeing more clean fuel vehicles. We'll talk about that next. We've also heard stories about UPS, only taking right turns or whatever to kind of modify their operations to increase the overall fuel efficiency, not necessarily the vehicle, but of the entire system. So those are just some examples. At the community level, conducting traffic studies to kind of understand where the flows of traffic are, installing roundabouts, again, synchronizing those traffic signals. There's a lot of repetition here, but hoping to hear more from you. And then looking at this at a regional level, if these don't stop at the borders of a community or a city, then maybe we need to take a regional view and look at traffic calming measures in ways that optimize it across jurisdictions, among others. But these are just a few to kind of get the ball rolling and get the conversation started. But and I know that we're going to, so just to preview, the next topic is clean fuels. And so we're going to talk about electric vehicles and other kinds of clean fuels. So we want to save that, again, recognizing that there's a lot of overlap, but just if we can kind of break these up. But yeah, great suggestions. And we're also looking for kind of specific actions that could be taken at each of these levels. So thanks again for your participation.
Thank you, Scott, for that overview of reducing fuel use, for which we want your ideas. As Rebecca puts up the mural back again, I wanted you to think of this topic. What actions? So we're looking for specific actions or ideas, activities, things that governments, businesses, individuals can do to reduce fuel use. We're in the transportation sector, and in this transportation role, we want to particularly focus on disadvantaged communities in terms of benefits and costs, especially because historically these communities have been left behind. We'll be using this mural tool to receive your feedback, your ideas, your suggestions, your thoughts, your experiences, and arrange them in these topics. It will also help us prepare the implementation playbook, as I mentioned, and to follow up with you. And once again, I'll try to do both, follow on the chat and on the audio. I do want to mention that the next topic on electric vehicles is a pretty substantial one. And so if I can manage the time a little bit more here, then we can save a greater chunk for that last topic. So whilst it's okay, go ahead. And I wasn't, if you want to go on the, if I guess those were legacy hands that you're putting down. If anybody wants to go on the audio, just put up your hand. I'll just, in the meantime, I'll just read off some of the comments here. Craig says, reduce fuel use by for electric vehicles should be rated for miles per kilowatt hour. Carl suggests congestion pricing to charge folks driving in high income areas during peak hours on key corridors. And of course, John talks about roundabouts. It would be good to hear feedback on how roundabouts work. We've seen some of that in higher density urban areas, but what about in rural areas? Is that what is the experience in the different parts of the region? Craig also reminds us to stop sprawl. Kyle says, how about converting existing like highway, road, and freeway space for car lane into other uses such as transit? And I know that in, for example, mid-city, there's also a lid on the freeway for public use as a park. Rimga has given us a thank you, Rimga, for a resource. We're going to collect your documents and we're going to link it so that these resources can be kind of connected to some of the suggestions in the implementation playbook. Okay, and then bye, Rimga. And then and if you want to come back on, you can come back on, but otherwise I'll first go to Christina, Hi, Christina.
Hey, thank you. I am only commenting right now at this moment because I have to step off at 3 p.m. And I know we're kind of getting into the part. I saw a comment from somebody pertaining EV infrastructure and reliability issues. And that's something with us with IBEW, not just in San Diego and Imperial counties, which is who I work with, but all over the United States and California. We're really trying to focus on making sure that, one, it's built by trained, certified electricians, because it's dangerous. We're plugging into, an electric vehicle and you're doing it by hand. So we don't want anybody to get injured. And also, with all the funds that are going to be coming through, the NEVI program, IGA or IRA, the IIJA, there's a lot of funds coming this way, and now's the time for us to take advantage and make sure that we get all those EV charging stations installed, because if we build it, people will have a little better opportunity to, a little more incentive to buy an EV. And another thing that's coming up is Prop 30 or Proposition 30. And that includes, if it's passed, funding to help build that EV infrastructure, charging infrastructure. And it'll also help with incentives to help those, lower income communities to be able to afford those used electric vehicles. So that's kind of what I wanted to chime in. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, Christina. If you can hang around just for a little bit longer, we'll be talking about about cleaner fuels, but it's okay. We got your comment. And I don't see any other hands raised. I'll just quickly touch on Rebecca Falk's point. And if I don't see any more hands raised, we'll move over to clean fuels. So just to repeat, this is Rebecca's in the chat. In different words, for the backcountry villages like Borrego Springs, encourage walk like electric bikes, and for us, also street legal golf carts for in-valley transportation by slowing traffic within the valley. It is now unsafe. It's also really hot here, so a lot of seniors can't really use the bikes. So she recommends supporting local efforts to provide a local transit service for within the valley, since we aren't getting more transit that connects all the way to San Diego. Thank you so much, Rebecca Falk. All right, as wrapping up this conversation, Rebecca Pell, thank you so much for sharing your screen with us on the mural. We will be transitioning to the last topic for today, which is clean fuel. All right, Scott, go ahead.
Okay, thanks again, Murtaza. So final topic here is clean fuels. This is, I know, a popular one. We've been talking about it already in both other areas. So again, just some high-level background. It's already been mentioned, but the Inflation Reduction Act has funding for electric vehicles, among other fuel sources. California has a series of aggressive regulations now seeking 100% new light-duty vehicle sales to be zero-emission vehicle by 2035. Also initiatives around trucks and fleets. There is a low-carbon fuel standard, which seeks to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels. In our region, there's an effort underway called Accelerate to Zero, which is looking at, it's a regional approach to figure out how to advance electric vehicle uptake and charging infrastructure. There is rebates and incentives available, including the Cal EVIP program, which is, this particular one is unique to San Diego County. So lots of things happening with clean fuel vehicles and infrastructure. So it's kind of both sides of the equation there. Next slide. So some other kind of contextual or other considerations. We're seeing a rise of EVs, still relatively small in the overall fleet, but we're seeing kind of a fast increase. And it's there, like I said earlier, there's lots of connections between and among even what we're talking about today, but we're not even talking about the electric grid per se today, but we know that, you know, an increase in electric vehicles and other electrification strategies is going to mean that we're going to have a significantly higher demand on our grid. So there's something to think about with that. As was mentioned earlier in the chat, there's still relatively limited public EV charging. Medium and heavy duty vehicles can be harder to electrify, and those may be vehicles that need other low carbon fuels that are lower than existing fuels, but maybe not as low as others. We have relatively few hydrogen filling stations, and there are cost and energy implications of low carbon fuels. So for example, producing hydrogen is relatively costly at the moment and is very energy intensive. And then of course, it's already come up in the conversation around electric vehicles, but access to those vehicles, access to charging, there are some equity implications to be considered here as well. Just a couple examples to get the creative juices flowing here. But at the organizational level, we've seen organizations adopt fleet purchasing policies to expand the amount of low and zero emission vehicles they have in their fleet. We've seen municipalities or local governments installing EV charging infrastructure at public facilities, and this is happening in the private sector as well. At the community level, some cities have required EV chargers in various new development projects that aren't already required under code or encouraged under code. And then there's suggestions to provide an EV expert or consumer advocate for residents and businesses who may be interested in electric vehicles but may not have all the expertise that they need to make that purchase happen. And I think there's already some of these services available in our region. At the regional scale, I mentioned the A to Z, Accelerate to Zero Emissions initiative. That is really kind of looking at this, looking at EV vehicles and chargers from a regional perspective, including things like equity. And so again, it would be interesting to see kind of a regional analysis related to equity, air quality impacts, et cetera, of EVs, among other things. So these are just some examples of kind of the actions, and the type of actions we're looking for are very specific or very sort of actionable suggestions that we can include in the into the playbook. So Murtaza, with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Scott. So for this topic, once again, Scott gave us some examples of what we can do at a local level, individually, at a governmental level, and as a community. As I'll have Rebecca come back on and put up the mural, I want you to think of this question: what can we do to get these vehicles in the future to use cleaner fuel? I want to give the context here that the California Air Resources Board has adopted a rule that all new cars and light trucks sold in California will be zero emissions vehicles, including hybrid electric vehicles, by 2035. So you won't be able to purchase a new vehicle after that. And then what's also in the pipe is a proposed rule on phasing out diesel trucks by 2045. Sorry, by 2040. There are, as part of that rulemaking process, also requirements for government agencies, state and local government agencies, that by I believe 2026 will not be able to purchase, sorry, 2027, all trucks purchased would be zero emission by local government. And for large trucking companies with over 50 vehicles, like UPS and FedEx, there will be a phase out by 2042. 2 of their existing fleet in terms of polluting. So this is where the state kind of landscape is headed towards cleaner fuels. And as we're thinking of how do we think about this in the context of, and I believe it'll come up in our discussion to Inflation Reduction Act, how do we as a region position ourselves to take advantage of this new transportation economy? And how do we help our lowest income and the most disadvantaged communities? And then how do we lift up cities and communities? How do we make our businesses sustainable and well positioned to take advantage of these investments? And then finally, our region, how do we get our region competitive? So with that, I'll thank you, Rebecca. I'll turn it over to comments and questions. And once again, if you can put your hand up. Oh, if you can put your hand up in the queue, I'll be able to call you for audio. In the meantime, I'm reading comments in the chat. And Rebecca, Rebecca, who's working on the mural, says that if you have your comments in the chat, we can capture them in the mural. Okay, I'll move to first comment from Rebecca Falk from Borrego Springs. Thank you for all your comments in the past as well. One San Diego County program that was already in effect is for new commercial projects, EV charging stations are required. Has already come up here and is appreciated. The library and chamber also have charging stations in place. And she has seen these charging stations in the library being used. That's great to hear some feedback when we build facilities as the government, that we also provide that kind of amenity for the community to use. I wanted to, as you're thinking of this, think of activities, actions that we can take, and some of the examples that Scott gave are just like Rebecca mentioned, requiring EV chargers in new multifamily projects. Just wanted to square that with state law that passed. The governor signed it a couple of weeks ago. This is Assembly Bill 2075, would specify that anticipated future needs and building electrification plans include future and mandatory vehicle charging standards in the California Buildings Code. Another example that Scott had was providing EV expert or consumer advocate for residents and businesses. So I just wanted to put those out there to hear your thoughts. We may have lost Christina, but if you're still there, then come back on. And it's a topic about electrification for workers, workforce development. And has a question. Does San Diego have an electric car share program, seeing that they exist in Sacramento and LA? And let's just a sec. Let me see if anybody from my team wants to answer that. If anybody from the regional agencies or other cities want to answer, jump in, because I think that this could be this is program by San Diego Association of Governments, probably. Okay, we'll follow up with you later. And I have another question for the group. In terms of this has been a favorite kind of topic of discussion for some of the folks that know that for many communities and households that just cannot afford to go electric. And I know that there's going to be a lot of talk about incentives and all that, tax credits, but how about just trading in? How about retiring vehicles with low MPGs and even higher MPGs as you're living in that country, combined with, for example, an income eligibility program that gives you an incentive to buy or transition to a zero emissions vehicle or an electric vehicle. Okay, let me read some comments. Craig, I'll come to you just a sec. Andrew has some comments. Right now, charging on a public EV charger can be twice plus the cost of private charging, and nearly as much as fueling up a fuel-efficient gas-powered vehicle like a hybrid Prius. So providing affordable or subsidized public chargers is important and has equity implications. So this is like in terms of public chargers, if we think about even our public facilities, but also like things like parks, roads, highway infrastructure, all that could be public chargers. Also, Andrew says, if I'm not mistaken, the EV charging money in the IIJA. Can you please explain to us what is IIJA? It's to build level.
Right. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I was just saying that, someone before had mentioned that there was lots of federal money coming in to build an EV charging network. And I just wanted to flag that, that is correct. But if not mistaken, that money is supposed to go towards installing DC fast chargers along highways, which is great, but it doesn't do a lot to drive adoption, in households that can't have a charger at home. I think highway charging isn't really a sustainable model for people who live in multifamily housing. So I just wanted to flag that it's probably important for the region to spend its non-federal EV dollars on, other types of charging strategies.
Thank you, Andrew. Is there, I see you had other thoughts. If there's anything else that you want to add?
No, just those two ideas.
Thank you. That's Andrew with the San Diego Regional Innovation Policy Center. Okay, next, Craig, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Murtaza. It was mentioned that I believe the county is now requiring electric vehicle charging stations at commercial developments. The same should be done, required for multifamily housing developments, at least one electric vehicle charging element, in addition to parking requirements. You also solicited comments about incentives for electric vehicles, and up until now, I believe federal and state tax subsidies have been available for purchasing new electric vehicles, which are very expensive vehicles. But I believe it's true that the federal legislation that was recently passed will include subsidies for purchase of used electric vehicles. And that's something that I think the county could help publicize and move forward.
Thank you, Craig. The Inflation Reduction Act has a subsidy of up to $4,000 or 30% of the cost of a vehicle, up to $25,000 for a vehicle that's used that would cost up to $25,000. The unique thing about this bill is that this is the first time we know of that it's actually providing a tax credit for a used vehicle. But also interesting about this is the provisions on income. So there's an income limitation for the new vehicles, as well as manufacturing requirements for the new vehicles. So there are two things. One is the used one up to $4,000, and the new vehicles, which I believe it was $7,500. All right. Whilst I'm looking at if I not missed any other comment, I'll give it one more last call for any comment coming over audio. And has quite a few comments, and feel free to come on audio, and because you might be able to speak quicker than I can read your comment.
Hey, sorry, that's it for my questions, and I don't want to just take up all the bandwidth at this discussion.
Okay, no problem.
I mean, this the last one. This is something from that I noticed a while back. It was in Canary Media, climate media news outlet. This is about a startup. I just wanted to know whether this is I mean, obviously we're not Long Beach. We don't have the same massive amounts of trucks coming in and out of a port as they do, but that concept intrigued me. This is quote Watt EV. It's a startup planning on this quote electric truck as a service business, solar battery powered charging hubs, and they want to do it across SoCal and Central Cal. So they've got a partnership announced with Port of Long Beach, and they're using, the grants and incentives, some of the ones that we've alluded to, I imagine. Again, we're not Long Beach, but that just intrigued me. So that's it.
Thank you, Anne.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna, since I already made the last call, I'm gonna wrap up this conversation about the clean fuels. It is gonna be quite phenomenal rollout of the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act as it transforms some of the auto manufacturing and leads to a change in charging infrastructure around every city in the country. It'll also kind of it is expected to spur some of the manufacturing supply chain issues around batteries, particularly, and battery components, assembly of these parts. So there's a lot to kind of look forward to in the future years. It's almost a 10-year industrial policy that will ramp up over time, because as automakers start catching up with the production requirements, because initially there may not be any car that actually qualifies for the $7,500 tax credit, but as projected out by 2026, auto manufacturers expect that the number of models, electric vehicle models available, are going to double in number. Okay, so with that, I wanted to conclude this topic on clean fuels and talk about the gap. This is basically, we know that we don't have time to cover everything, and sometimes we don't even know whether we have enough in our database of current solutions. So so that is the reason why we wanted to keep an open discussion section in each of these sectors, so that we can capture from what our working group might have ideas about that we are missing. And these are missing in terms of the topics we discussed today, but also missing in the discussions around climate action plans at cities and regional governments. And we want to know what are the different activities, actions that individuals, businesses, governments can take. So if you can focus a little bit on specific actions rather than very just policy level or broadly a concept, it will help us in kind of defining this tool. So with that, and also remember that this is the beginning of the conversation. We're asking you these questions. You can follow up with us, email us, call us. We're available, and our team is there to listen to you. So I'll open it up right now for anybody that wants to come over the audio. Not seeing anybody come up on the audio. Let me try to put my own questions into your mind in terms of transportation of the future. We know that as one of the thoughts that came up was teleworking, but also in terms of the infrastructure of the past, it has been the hardened infrastructure that has often divided communities, but has also kind of been driven in a hierarchical manner. What does the transportation of the future look like? Rebecca, go ahead. Rebecca Falk.
Just had to figure out how to unmute myself here. And I'm sorry, I'm not figuring. Oh, here we go. I can give you a visual. Whoops. I don't really have an answer to what the transportation of the future looks like, but I'm kind of thinking in a very general way about the discontent in the backcountry, about feeling left out. Maybe we're not left out of financing some of these transportation efforts, but we are left out of the benefits from them because we live way out here and people have to use cars to get into town when they need to go. But I was wondering about having some funding available that people could apply to for innovative transportation within their community, so that, you know, it would be a community driven effort, but there would be funds to help, maybe not funds to do the whole thing, but something like that would maybe spark some innovative transportation solutions for backcountry communities. Not so much between here and some of the larger population centers, because that's really hard, but at least within the town, because there's a lot of driving that could be cut down. So that's one thought I had.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Rebecca's thought is there are often these communities that are left out in the backcountry that are not considered when more urban-centric transportation solutions are funded and occurring. In terms of transportation solutions themselves, I know that the 5 big moves, somebody mentioned the 5 big moves had captured some of that kind of connectivity in terms of how mobility options are going to be integrated, many of them technology-based. And I wanted to, because I know oftentimes we're not able to project how much, like, you know, what that trajectory looks like. But if anybody wants to speak to it, or if you have any other thoughts, please, you're welcome to come and just raise your hands. I'll call on Craig next.
Thank you. A couple of comments. First of all, reacting to the comment about backcountry communities feeling left out. And Murtaza, you're mentioning the 5 big moves. One of the 5 big moves, flexible fleets, is intended to apply public transportation access at the local level, at the neighborhood and community local level. So taking full advantage of opportunities through what Sandag rolls out for flexible fleets for those backcountry communities could help, like a local shuttle service in the Borrego Springs area that serves just that local community area, does not necessarily drive outside of it, could help and provide that level of senior access that's lacking right now. The other totally different comment that occurred to me from reaching back to my days in social service, I'm reminded that there are federal regulations for banking called the Community Reinvestment Act that requires federally chartered banks to invest back in underserved communities. And I'm wondering if the county could act as a lever to encourage regional financial institutions to invest in electric vehicle infrastructure for underserved communities. Again,
Great
by
idea.
applying the Community Reinvestment Act.
Thank you, Craig. Using the Community Reinvestment Act, which requires lending institutions to invest in certain communities that have been underbanked, and also to set aside funding for investment in those communities, to use that pot of money for this kind of infrastructure. Thank you, Craig. All right. Next, so with that, I think I don't have any other hands go up. So I just want to kind of last thoughts here and wrap up. The Climate Crisis Act, which was signed into law by the governor, establishes a clear, legally binding and achievable goal for California to achieve statewide carbon neutrality as soon as possible, but no later than 2045, and establish an 85% reduction target as part of that goal. I mentioned that because we as a region need to think about what other ways that we can get there collaboratively. And with that, I will turn it back to Yasamin.
All right, everybody, thank you again for joining us. We will be posting the notes we took during this workshop and then the recording on the special topic working group portal. So please be sure to check back in for additional materials and resources. If you also think of any additional actions or activities or programs, please use the engagement site to share your ideas or send us your ideas in email as well so that we can take a look. We will be meeting for our next transportation workshop on October 27th. So please make sure you are registered to attend. Additionally, our next special topic working group will be held this Thursday, September 29th on buildings. So if you're interested in this topic as well, you can also register on the homepage of our engagement portal as well. Again, feel free to email us or post your questions on our site, and we will see you all again very soon. Have a great afternoon, everybody.